Welcome back to Proxy, everybody, and today we're going to be talking and diving into Swooping Hawks and discussing why they are actually pretty OP. Now, when the Codex first came out, a lot of people were disappointed at what they did with Swooping Hawks, and I was one of those people. When I saw their datasheet, when I saw their points value, I kind of scoffed at it because it didn't make sense why Swooping Hawks were the same points as they were in the index, but noticeably worse. At least as far as being a scoring unit, they were worse. But I didn't think of their potential as another type of unit, and I definitely didn't think of their potential into certain matchups. And what do you know? It seems like the meta is turning around into a place where Swooping Hawks actually have a lot of value. So we're going to be talking about that in the video, and we're going to be going over why Swooping Hawks might actually be OP. Okay, so what are we going to be talking about in this video today? We're going to be looking at their stats, weapons, and special rules, their strengths and weaknesses. We're going to be talking about their combos and synergies, and how to use and position Swooping Hawks effectively on the battlefield. So looking at their stat line, they're among the squishiest aspect warriors with a 4+ save. They have a 5+ invul. I would actually argue that point for point, these are the squishiest aspect warriors in the book. They're pretty close as far as, durability to things like Dire Avengers, but Dire Avengers are cheaper. So these guys are going to be point for point a little bit more fragile. Only having a 4+ save kind of sucks, but they're Eldar. Most Eldar units have a pretty bad save and bad toughness, of course, because we're squishy space elves. However, the movement value of these guys is really where the datasheet kind of shines because it's movement 14. And, with battle focus tokens, this can become movement 16, which is a pretty big breakpoint that we're going to talk about later in this video. They do have a 5+ invul save like every other aspect warrior, but essentially they're exactly the same. They have the same leadership, same OC value, and all that good stuff. As far as their ranged weapons, the Exarch can take either the Hawk's Talon, which is a marine killer, has 2 shots, hits on 3s, strength 6, AP -2, damage 2, lethal hits, or the Exarch's Last Blaster, which is just an improved version of the regular Last Blaster, has assault, 24 inches, has 4 attacks instead of 2, strength 5, AP 1, damage 1. The reason why I don't prefer the Hawk's Talon with most Swooping Hawks is because it doesn't have the assault keyword, meaning that it can't advance and shoot. Now, it does kill Marines quite handily, but again, it doesn't have assault. So you can't advance and shoot with it, and that kind of is a little bit of an anti-synergy with what the Swooping Hawks want to do, and especially their ability, which we'll talk about in just a second. The regular Hawks are all armed with Last Blasters, has assault, lethal hits, which is a pretty good special rule. I actually think that it is one of the best rules for weapons in the entire game. It's one of the things that a lot of times makes or breaks competitive armies, whether they have a nice, kind of access to lethal hits. But otherwise, it's a pretty lackluster weapon. Strength 4, AP 0, damage 1. It's just slightly better than a last gun as far as its damage stats. Of course, it does have more attacks. We do also have the chance to take a scatter laser for the Exarch. Now, the scatter laser is just a standard scatter laser. There's nothing special about it. It's definitely not something you want to take with the Autarch, or Exarch, I should say. Again, doesn't have lethal hits, has sustained, which is decent, but it also doesn't have assault. So if you want to deep strike your Hawks in, it may not seem like that big of a deal because you're not going to be advancing anyway, but I would actually argue that deep striking these guys is not something they want to do unless they are, of course, accompanying Baharroth. You can also take a Sun Pistol on the Exarch instead of the Last Blaster, or Exarch's Last Blaster. It has assault, lethal hits, the pistol rule, and 2 attacks, strength 4, AP 0, damage 1. Now, this is basically just half of a Last Blaster, but the trade-off is you get to take a power weapon with it. So as far as their melee weapons, the normal Hawks have terrible melee, just like every other aspect warrior that's not melee focused. But the Exarch can take a power sword if he chooses to go with the Sun Pistol. Strength 5, 5 attacks, hitting on 3s, strength 4, AP minus 2, damage 1. It's basically just a power sword with more attacks, which is fine. You know, it does make the Exarch pretty decent in melee. I would say that there would normally be an argument for this in some situations, but most of the time you're just going to want the extra shots and extra strength of the Exarch's last blaster. As far as their abilities go, of course, they do have Deep Strike and Battle Focus, but their primary ability is the Grenade Pack Flyover. So once per turn in your movement phase, when this unit is either set up on the battlefield or ends a normal advance or fallback move, keep in mind that this includes advance and fallback moves, in which case grenades cannot be used. So this is a superior way of being able to get mortal wounds onto your opponent. Now, if you do, you can use this ability. You target a unit within 8 inches and visible to this unit, and roll 1d6 for each Swooping Hawks model in the unit. For each 4-up, the enemy suffers 1 mortal wound to a max of 6. However, if you do use this, you cannot use the grenade stratagem until the end of the turn. Now, at its face, this looks just like a crappier version of grenades, right? First of all, your Swooping Hawks are probably going to be in 5-man units, if we're thinking about it in a very min-maxy way. That means 5 dice instead of the normal 6 with the grenades. You get to target a unit within 8, just like grenades, but the advantage of this is that it only has to be visible to a single model. You only need one model to be able to see the target for every single Swooping Hawks model to be able to use the grenade pack. So that means when you position them on the battlefield, you only need to reveal one model to your opponent to be able to do the maximum amount of damage. Now that's the first thing. However, there is more. Now, I truly believe that with how fast Swooping Hawks are, being able to use this after an advance or fallback move is insanely good. It's insanely good. It means that this unit can actually do damage when it's moving its full distance and when it's falling back. Now, you guys might be wondering, Proxy Hammer, when is this ever going to come up? The advance, I can see, right? They advance forward, they use their grenade pack, they get to shoot. I can see that. But what about the fallback move, right? Is there ever a situation where they would want to fall back from something? So here's the thing, right? When we compare them to their contemporaries, the Warp Spiders, the Warp Spiders get Flicker Jump, which allows them to move 24 and sometimes up to 26 inches with Battle Focus. Swooping Hawks can move 16 inches without advancing. Now that doesn't seem that great, right? But 16 inches is actually an important breakpoint because it allows them to charge from your side of the battlefield to the opponent's side of the battlefield. And again, you might be wondering, Proxy Hammer, why are we charging Swooping Hawks into something? We can't charge Warp Spiders into something, right? Because if they flicker jump, they're not going to be able to do it. And if they just move the normal 14, they're not going to necessarily have enough juice to get to the charged target. Because as you guys know, the distance in Pariah Nexus between one deployment zone and another is usually approximately about 18 inches. Sometimes 20, right? Depending on the deployment zone setup and so forth. But typically it's pretty short, which is why melee armies are dominating the meta. Warp Spiders also have the negative effect of rolling for mortal wounds. So, yes, on average dice, you should only suffer 1 wound and you just put it on the Exarch. That's the typical. But I don't know about you guys, but I've rolled 3, 4 1s sometimes with my Warp Spiders. I run a bunch of Warp Spiders in my lists, and they have rolled poorly. And what that means is that they become a less effective screen. And they are an expensive unit. You are basically losing most of the unit if you roll a bad roll. You know, if you have a bad roll like that, you're killing 60 points worth of your own models, which is kind of insane. It's actually a change I do not like. I wish they would have just made the flicker jump slightly shorter, maybe made it 20 inches or 22 inches, but, made the mortals a little bit more manageable. Maybe just if you use flicker jump, you automatically suffer one mortal wound no matter what. That would have been a better thing to me, at least, right? But anyway, that's not how they chose to do it. So, why am I comparing these two units? Well, when warp spiders jump, there's a huge risk of them actually just blowing themselves up, right? It may not seem like a huge risk, but if you're playing dozens of games, it's going to happen. And it could just straight up lose you a game sometimes. I had a game where I was playing my Space Marine buddy. I really needed a squad of warp spiders to plug a gap so that my, friend couldn't move his rhino through the gap and onto the objective with some pretty serious firepower. And unfortunately, I rolled 4 ones. So my unit of warp spiders, I had to take the Exarch out, and I had to take 2 other warp spiders out, which basically meant that I only had 3 models to work with to plug a gap, and it just wasn't quite enough to do it with the movement value that I had. And that was it, right? Because I couldn't do it, I had to remove the models as they were because it's the end of the movement phase. So basically how flicker jump works, you guys, just a quick reminder, is you move up, you position your models, and then at the end of the movement phase, that's when you roll. So you don't get to reposition your models afterwards. So, unfortunately, I was unable to screen them at that point. Swooping Hawks do not have this issue. They can move forward 16 inches, they can charge at 16 inches, or they could advance another d6. And while they do this, they can still shoot. Warp spiders cannot shoot if they advance, right? They have to flicker jump, which is risky, like I just said. And not only can the Swooping Hawks shoot, but they can also use this grenade pack ability, which is mortal wounds. So against very tough targets, this is extremely good. May not seem like that, but even just 3 extra mortal wounds on something like a Demon Prince, or something that, is relying on an invulnerable save to mitigate most of the damage, is going to suffer a good amount of damage to a fairly cheap unit, right? Swooping Hawks are 85 points. They're not that much points. Against demons, this is insane, right? Being able to advance, move block something, perhaps, and then also at the same time throw a grenade and shoot them with lethal hits and force a bunch of invul saves on 4+, is pretty good value for a unit that, by all rights, shouldn't really be doing damage to high toughness targets. The other thing is Swooping Hawks have a larger base size. So unlike Warp Spiders, Swooping Hawks can actually cover over a 5-man unit. They can cover more distance. And they can cover even more distance as a screen in a 10-man unit. Not saying you should necessarily take 10-man units in every list, but there are some pretty good players right now toying around with the idea of using 10 Hawks in their lists. And, maybe Vic from Fireside Podcast comes to mind for some of you. And that's why Swooping Hawks have been kind of popping up, as a discussion piece in a lot of people's Eldar circles because, people are starting to notice this unit. So yeah, the datasheet ability doesn't look good on paper, guys, but once you actually think about it a little bit more and you think about what else the Swooping Hawks bring to the table, it starts to look a lot more manageable for 85 points. And again, I think 85 points, still probably a little bit too high in some games, but in some matchups, it's actually really good value. All right, so they do get an Aspect Shrine token, just like every other Aspect Warrior, except for, of course, Shining Spears for some reason, and the Crimson Hunter. The Exarch can take a Exarch's Last Blaster, the Power Sword and Sun Pistol, or a Scatter Laser. And they come in 2 squad sizes, 5-man and 10-man. 5-man is 85 points, 10-man is 170. And of course, they do have the grenades keyword also. So, they can use their ability, or if you need a little bit of extra mortal wounds and you haven't advanced or fallen back or anything like that, then you can use grenades as well. Okay, let's talk about Baharroth, because I think it would be a little bit of a weird video to talk about Swooping Hawks without their Phoenix Lord Baha. So, Same stats as far as its movement and toughness as the regular aspect warriors. He does have a 2-up save and 5 wounds though, and he has a 4+ invul like every other basically Phoenix Lord. As far as his ranged weapons go, he has Fury of the Tempest, which is a assault, lethal hits, 4 attacks, hits on 2+, strength 6, AP -1, damage 2 weapon. Think about it like an upgraded Hawk's Talon. And it's weird to say that because it basically is a Hawk's Talon. If you know the lore, it's an upgraded Hawk's Talon. But the actual Hawk's Talon that we got with the Codex is a little bit different because it's more AP, but it doesn't have Assault. So, and it's less attack. So it's kind of a weird thing that they did with the Hawk's Talon. But yeah, it's basically an upgraded Hawk's Talon. He has the Shining Blade, which is a power sword in melee, has sustained hits 1, 6 attacks, hits on 2, strength 5, AP -2, damage 2, which is pretty good for killing Marines. He has Deep Strike and Battle Focus, of course, and he is a leader. As far as his abilities go, this is why you take Baharroth. First of all, he gives them the ability to Deep Strike within 6, and he has the ability to Skyleap. Yes, that's right. He gives his unit the old Skyleap. So at the end of your opponent's turn, if you're not within engagement range, you can remove the unit from the battlefield, put it in strat reserve, and then come out anywhere you want with the Deep Strike ability. If you do use the Deep Strike ability, you can be set up anywhere within 6 inches, right? But you can't declare a charge, which makes sense, right? It's basically 6-inch Deep Strike. Now, if this was his only ability, to be honest with you, I wouldn't think much of it. I would probably just say it's just worth it to have more models in your army than have this guy. 6-inch Deep Strike's a powerful ability, but not when you're spending 200+ points for it. However, he also has the Cry of the Wind, which essentially is whenever he is set up on the battlefield, so anytime he uses Skyleap or Deep Strikes or anything like that, until the end of your turn, when he makes a ranged attack, a successful unmodified hit roll scores a critical hit. Which means, because he has lethal hits, he will auto-wound with all of his attacks if he hits them. So all he has to do is hit on a 2+, and he will score crits. Which means, if we look back, I'm going to just refer back to our melee ranged weapon real quick. He is going to be shooting at strength 6, AP -1, damage 2. So he's going to be putting 4 shots in at strength 6, AP -1, damage 2. Now that's not really that good, right? If you think about it, but what it is really good against is high toughness models that you wouldn't normally be able to do damage to. So, things like Greater Demons. Greater Demons are tough. They have a 4+ invulnerable save. So this basically means that you're going to be, on average, just getting 4 wounds against them. They're going to be failing 2 saves, and they're going to be taking 4 damage. That's in addition to what the rest of the squad has, and that's also in addition to their grenade pack, which is pretty good. Again, that's pretty good damage. Now, is it worth 200 points is what we have to ask ourselves, because that's what the unit costs, right? Baharroth and 5 Hawks are 200 points. And I think it could be. I think it could be for a couple of reasons. First of all, as we know, Greater Demons are extremely tough to take down, and sometimes Fire Dragons just don't get the job done, right? You might get maybe 8 damage, 9 damage with a unit of Fire Dragons in, but Demon Princes and, Greater Demons have a lot more wounds. So maybe you do actually need, in addition to the dragons using their own grenade, maybe you need a squad of Hawks to throw in their Swooping Hawk grenade pack, throw in some damage, and finish that target off. Maybe that's what's required. Being able to Deep Strike 6 inches means that you can essentially come down, hit something really hard up close, and then you have the maneuverability to maybe fire and fade back behind a wall using a stratagem in the Warhost detachment. Or, once you get shot at, fade back behind that wall. There's a lot of options with Baharroth. Baharroth is also really good in the late game. If you keep him alive for long enough, if you use his range to your advantage, because, his unit has a 24-inch range, you can kind of put him wherever you want, then your opponent's in trouble, especially at the end of the game, because you're going to be able to score a bunch of stuff. You can take their home objective. Your opponent is in trouble. Okay, so obviously Baharroth can join Swooping Hawks, and he is 115 points. As far as his keywords go, he has the same keywords as the regular Swooping Hawks, including grenades. All right, let's talk about the Swooping Hawks' strengths and weaknesses. So their strengths are they have very fast base movement with Deep Strike. Deep Strike isn't such a big deal on the regular Hawk squads, but with Baharroth, it's something they need. They also have lethal hits on ranged attack with Assault, which, like I said before and explained, it means that they can move forward 16 inches, advance, shoot, and then, of course, use their grenade pack as well. They can also pass out mortal wounds after moving or being set up in your movement phase. Now, I will say this, though. A regular Hawk squad without Baharroth is not going to be able to deep strike and use their Hawk grenade pack in the same turn because you have to deploy outside of 9 inches. So that is something you have to think about, and it's why I think Swooping Hawks are best left on the battlefield. So if you have a squad of 5 Swooping Hawks, it's probably better just to deploy them normally instead of deep striking them. Their weaknesses, however, and they do have weaknesses as a unit, they have lowish damage for the points, especially against armor. They're pretty useless against infantry that's armored, so armored infantry either with a 3+ or especially with a 2+ save, they do almost nothing. They are also very fragile for the points, and their large bases can make it difficult to hide. However, their large bases also double as you guys know, a better screening tool. All right, let's talk about their combos and synergies. Like I said before, Baharroth gives them a 6-inch deep strike, sky leap, and contributes damage to the squad. His damage is pretty decent, but it's nowhere close to the other Phoenix Lords. Aspect Host can give them rerolls 1s, to hit or to wound, or sustained hits. Sustained hits on these guys is really good for chewing through light infantry if they do go up against it. War Host can give them a pseudo sky leap via a stratagem if within 9 inches of a board edge. So if you want to use Swooping Hawks like you used to for 1 CP, you can have them sky leap every turn. I've actually heard people using these guys with a Autarch as well, an Autarch Way Leaper, to get a free sky leap every turn. I think it's a little bit expensive to do that personally, but it is something that's kind of cool and has a lot of flavor to it. You can also give them sustained hits within 12 in the Warhost detachment, as well as just better movement, right? Warhost also gives them the ability to move, shoot, move via the Fire and Fade stratagem. Doom and Guide also are pretty good at, umping up their damage. Doom allows them to hit harder, and Guide allows them to hit more. So Eldrad using Doom on something and them, going in on it can be very effective, and a Farseer using Guide can help them hit more so that they can then get more wound rolls. Shroud Runners can remove cover from enemy units, and Warwalkers can boost their AP by 1. I don't think either of these are that substantial, right? You don't want to, plan for your Swooping Hawks to be, targeting something that Shroud Runners and Warwalkers targeting, just because it's too many points going into one thing typically. So unless you're trying to bring down a, Demon Primarch, unless you're trying to bring down Mortarion or something like that, it's usually not advisable to throw that much into something. The Seer Council can give them Ignores Cover and AP -1 on critical wounds, which is pretty good, right? Ignores Cover is decent for 1 CP. I think in Seer Council, these guys can do okay. AP -1 on critical wounds and Ignores Cover is pretty decent. So these guys can do a fair bit of damage to heavier targets in Seer Council. In the Devoted of You Need detachment, I think this detachment is where Swooping Hawks kind of become really good. And that is because, of course, of Lethal Intent. And it can allow for some really crazy moves that they can do. Now, here's a little disclaimer here. Personally, I believe that Lethal Intent is so overtuned right now that there's a lot of things that are good with it. So I'm not just saying Swooping Hawks are good because of Lethal Intent, because there's a lot of things that are good because of Lethal Intent that may not actually be good, right? Like, we can talk about a lot of different things that are really strong with Lethal Intent, but that's because Lethal Intent is a overtuned ability, right? So that's not saying much. However, for the next couple months until it's nerfed, until June, so actually probably a month, it's going to be really strong, right? Swooping Hawks using lethal intent can be kind of insane. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and switch to our tabletop simulator example where I'll run you through some of the deployment and setup strategies for the Swooping Hawks and give you a good idea of how to use them on the battlefield. Alrighty, welcome to our example of how to deploy and position Swooping Hawks on the battlefield on Tabletop Simulator. So, Swooping Hawks. They're a little bit interesting because while they don't quite have the range of movement that warp spiders do, they can certainly still cross the battlefield at pretty exceptional speeds, and a lot of times you don't need the full movement that warp spiders have to get where you're going, as long as you stage them correctly. So, let's go ahead and dive into it and talk about it. So, on the other side of the board, we have your typical Space Marine army. This could really be anything. I don't know why this guy's over here. He's just hiding out. He's like, I hope no one sees me behind this bush. Yeah, right. Get over there, buddy. All right, so we have a Space Marine deployment here. Now, this could be anything, right? This could be Space Marines. This could be, Emperor's Children, for God's sakes, with their stupid 3 Rhino, Scout Rush, and everything. Whatever it is, this is typically how they're going to deploy, right? Especially if they have Scout. So if they have Scout, you're going to have a Rhino probably somewhere right here, a Rhino right here, guaranteed. You might have some Dreadnoughts or Demon Princes, right? These could be Demon Princes with wings, which could be pretty freaking powerful. So there's a lot of big threats here behind these major pieces of terrain. So if your opponent's set up like this and they have really fast moving models, chances are they're going to get to you very quickly. If you don't have units to screen your opponent out, you're going to be in trouble. Now, I talked about earlier the difference between Warp Spiders and Swooping Hawks, and Swooping Hawks can actually still do damage to units they can barely see. So let me give you an example. See this setup right here? Let's say that I go first and I want to use my Swooping Hawks here to move, right? I can move, well, let's put the measure movement on these guys real quick. I can move 16 inches with a battle focus token, right? Turn 1. So I can go 16 inches, which is right here, right? I can kind of spread out a little bit if I wanted to, right? In deployment. Really, I mean, I have this whole space. If I'm just running 5 of them, I have this whole space I could spread out with. But I can move right here, and then I can advance D6, right? So if we roll a dice here, unless I roll a 1, I'm going to get close enough to do something. 6, perfect. So we can, that's not the typical result, but we can kind of move into position here, right? So as long as we get a 5, we can kind of move here and move up. I'm just going to assume we get like a 3 or 4, right? We move here, kind of spread out, and we're kind of blocking this Rhino from moving forward, right? So that's the goal. We just want to be able to block things from moving forward, like vehicles who can't normally move over walls, flying Demon Princes, I assume under normal circumstances can't fly over walls that effectively, so we've basically blocked our opponents off. Now, we can't shoot them in this case, but again, we're basically doing the same exact thing that Warp Spiders were going to do, but cheaper, and Swooping Hawks don't have to roll for mortals. So we have 5 models here. If our opponent wants to, kind of move through here, they're not going to be able to do it. There is 0 chance we are going to roll 3 1s or 4 1s or something catastrophic and just fail to block our opponent off, right? Now, I know what you guys are thinking. Well, Proxy Hammer, you only need 1 model for the Warp Spiders to survive to block this little spot off. And that's true, right? You do only need a single model to block a tank. But here's what your opponent can do now. Moves the Rhino up, or not, you don't even have to move the Rhino. Just get the squad inside, disembark 3, move. Emperor's Children have free moves too, by the way, so they get to move in the shooting phase for CP. And then they could just move on to the objective. So this one Swooping Hawk did absolutely nothing to prevent that unit from getting where it wanted to go, right? Or that one Warp Spider in that case. If that was one Warp Spider, it would have done nothing. 2 warp spiders, nothing. 3 warp spiders, still nothing. Could still go through here, right? You kind of need the whole squad to be able to screen this out to make this work, right? Because at that point, your opponent's going to have to go over here, and even with that move, probably not going to be able to get on the objective, right? If you position correctly. So, Swooping Hawks have a 0 risk of basically failing there. Now, that's one way to use them, right? These guys actually have several different things that they can do. So, the other thing you should think about is using these guys later on in the game, because you are going to have other units in your army. It's not just going to be Swooping Hawks. You're going to maybe have a squad of Striking Scorpions or something like that. So, on the first turn, maybe your Scorpions deploy, 9 inches away from this, and you get first turn, so you block this area off with an advance move. That's the best play you can make with Warp Spiders, right? Striking Scorpions. Sometimes I get my units mixed up a little bit. So that's the best turn 1 move you can do. Move block with the Striking Scorpions. I'm going to just load in some Scorps for you right now, so you guys understand where we're coming from. So first turn, these guys infiltrate, right? They're going to be probably right about here in between these 2 objectives here, and then they're going to do something like this with their scout move and everything and their advance move, and they're just going to block your opponent from being able to move through the wall and do something like this, right? Not quite maybe exactly like that, but something along these lines where they're in coherency, they're spread out a little bit, they're 2 inches apart from each other exactly, and they're all there. Your opponent now cannot move the Rhino through, cannot move the infantry through, and if the Demon Prince wants to move, it's going to have to go around, right? If this is a Demon Prince. If it's a Dreadnought, still has to move around, and it has no targets, right? Yeah, it could get on the objective, but you can then kill it pretty easily. The main thing is your opponent's not going to be able to engage and get in good positions with their Noise Marines, with their, Assault Intercessors, whatever's in these Rhinos. They're just not going to be able to get good positions on your army. So then once they wipe out the Scorpions, and they probably will, right? Once they wipe out the Scorpions, typically speaking, Warp Spiders are next. Now, Warp Spiders, they're a little bit more expensive. They don't do mortal wounds. So, if you can get a bead on an enemy, they're really good. They can really do a lot of damage to a Space Marine squad, kill like 3, maybe sometimes 4 of them. But usually, if you're trying to block around walls and move block, Warp Spiders really aren't going to be doing that much damage. Whereas a unit of Swooping Hawks that's staged behind, let's say, this ruin right here, right? If we took turn 1, we go here, we stage up, we're, kind of spread out here, we're 1.1 inches away from the wall. We have our big 32 mil bases, so we don't have to worry as much about, models going through that wall. And our opponent moves something big here, our opponent can now not charge the Swooping Hawks, right? So we are actually, if we position these guys correctly, we are putting 3 OC on the objective, so to capture it, and actually, this is what I actually like to do. I like to put a little more than 3 OC on the objective just to make sure I can hold it, right? So I like to put 4 models right here, typically, or not 4 models, sorry. I like to put a model here, so I'm blocking this off. Nobody is going to charge way over here. That usually just doesn't happen from the safety of the ruins right here. Most units cannot go from here all the way to the edge. It's just typically not going to happen when you have units that are also screening over here turn 1, right? When you have Rangers or Striking Scorpions screening, units typically can't do that. So I like to just bring these models a little closer so that I have 4 models just touching the objective right here, just towing the objective and making sure that they can't get that. Also, just trying my best to be 1.1 away from the wall so that I don't have to, get charged. So that's one thing you can do. You can also, sometimes what I like to do is I like to, throw something else on the objective. But anyway, that's just to ensure that you have control of the objective. Now, it doesn't matter much for the first turn. If your opponent does this on the first turn, it's kind of a bad move because they're not scoring any points. So unless they get something that is like storm hostile objective or something like that, they're just not going to get the points for it. So usually you can just afford to put 3 models right here, and your opponent's not going to be able to do anything about it unless they put more OC on that objective. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Flying Demon Princes and stuff like that have OC 3. So again, they're not really good at controlling objectives against infantry. Okay, so you can do this, right? And then the next turn, you can block again. So after these Striking Scorpions die, you can move these Swooping Hawks forward again, and they can just move block just like the Scorpions did in the previous turn. And that's kind of how you want to play these guys. You want to play them as a kind of a mid-game screening unit, turns 2, 3, and 4, screening when your initial screens are destroyed, and just preventing your opponent from getting good positions on the battlefield. What you don't want to do against any army, now I haven't played against Emperor's Children yet, but I've heard what they can do, and I'm telling you, you don't want to let the Emperor's Children cross the midboard. Because as soon as they start controlling the midboard, controlling right here, you're done. They're going to move their units. They're really fast. They get to move again as well. I believe via stratagem and stuff like that. They have scout. You're just not going to be able to stop them from getting in here, getting on your objectives, killing all your units, and just causing havoc. Okay, so kind of what you want to do with Swooping Hawks. And again, while you're doing this, by the way, guys, there's always a possibility of, you see this rhino back here, right? You can always do something like this, right? With the Swooping Hawks. Have like one Swooping Hawk here, one Swooping Hawk here, one here, right? And then you can grenade. So that's not something you can do with Warp Spiders, right? And then maybe you have something else over here, I don't know. Or maybe you just forget about that and maybe you do this. You put one Swooping Hawk right here so that it can see everything, and then the rest right here. So you're still kind of screening this area out here, but I know that's not perfect, but this Swooping Hawk is the only one that actually can see these models, but it can also easily just grenade pack because, again, like we discussed, you only need one model that can see the unit to grenade pack with the whole unit. Okay. Lastly, let's talk about the Aeldari. So I've heard a lot about this in the Discord and everything. People are talking about, Vic from Fireside Podcast with his Eldar running, 25 Swooping Hawks or something like that in his army, his Aeldari list. So why does that work, right? A lot of people think that's kind of crazy. Now, the reason why it works is because of lethal intent. So let's say that something dies and you get a lethal intent move, right? So 10 Swooping Hawks can move 16 inches forward on lethal intent. So it can move right here. Boom, right? And then in their own movement phase, they can both move and advance and use battle focus, another 16. Let's actually, hold on. I don't know why it's, pretty sure it's toggled. No, it's not. Why did it move them the first time? Weird. Okay, so they're right here. Sorry, guys. They're right here. I'm going to move them 16 inches. Yeah, I had that correct. I don't know why it stopped all of a sudden. So we have them right here, and then they're going to move another 16. And without even advancing, check out how far they can move up the battlefield. They can move to the enemy's objective in one turn. From your deployment zone to the enemy's deployment zone, they can shoot 40 shots with lethal hits, throw a grenade pack, and then screen every single model in your opponent's deployment zone, right? They could even advance. They could go like this. They could do an advance move and spread out while they're at it, which is pretty insane. So you could do something like this with Swooping Hawks. Guys, that's just not really possible. I mean, it's possible with Warp Spiders, but remember, with Warp Spiders, you have to roll 10 dice to see, if models die. And that could go very badly. Swooping Hawks don't have to do it. They have lethal hits, so they're naturally going to be better against tougher targets. especially demons, and demons are big in the meta now, guys. A lot of people are running Shadow Legion, with Be'lakor and everything like that. A lot of new Chaos Space Marine players are going to be running demon allies as well. So you're going to see a lot of demon princes. You're going to see a lot of, big, tough monsters in people's lists. And Swooping Hawks are a pretty good answer to doing good ship damage against those. So if you think about it this way, against a greater demon, you're throwing out 40 shots. And you could even throw in, if you wanted to, emissaries if you need to reroll ones to hit. I think it works in the shooting phase at least. Or you could just, not spend a CP on it, whatever, right? You're throwing out 40 shots. You're doing probably an average of 11 wounds, maybe 12 total. And they're going to fail half of those because greater demons don't really have an armor or anything like that, I don't think. So maybe they fail 6 or maybe they even fail 5, something around there, right? And then you throw a grenade. You're rolling 10 dice, capping out at 6. So you're probably going to get about 5. It's 5 more mortals done to the, big demon. That's 10 damage. That is 10 damage to a really tough target, and you're screening out all of your opponent's army, basically, right? If any models were behind this, if any models were behind here, on the objective, behind this wall, they cannot move properly now. They can't stage effectively behind here. This is a great staging area, at least for this deployment type. This is a fantastic staging area. You've just denied your opponent that staging area, right? Spread these guys out a little more. So now your opponent can't really do it. So yeah, Swooping Hawks. Honestly, in Ynnari, who knew? They're actually pretty good. I mean, Lethal Intent makes a lot of different units good, but it's kind of insane that you can do this with Swooping Hawks while doing a lot of damage. I mean, these guys, again, they can shoot at the same time as they advance, which is something Warp Spiders cannot do. So there is an argument to be made about Swooping Hawks. Now, I mean, Victor has 2 units of 10 and a unit of 5, I think, with Baharroth. So you have a huge unit of 10 here. It's doing it turn 1. Then on turn 2, you do it again with 10 more Swooping Hawks somewhere else on the battlefield. It just makes it really hard for your opponent to move around. Are there ways around this? Absolutely. One of the ways around this is have something really strong that can overwatch these Hawks to death. That can probably kill all of them in one phase, right? Now that is going to be hard. Most people aren't taking big flamer units anymore, right? It's just not meta to take a bunch of Infernus Marines or, a big flamey thing that's going to fire a bunch of flamers. That's typically not what you see going on. But, you do have to watch out for that. So that may take 2 inches of movement off of you. But it's still not that big of a deal because you just say, I ignore Overwatch, right? Yeah, you don't get the extra 2 inches, but you can ignore Overwatch. So maybe instead of spreading out this far, maybe they only move 14 after Lethal Intent because you're not going to be able to Overwatch them when they Lethal Intent. But after they move the second time, they just do an advance roll. And if they roll really badly on their advance, like, let's say they roll like a 1, right? Well, you can just always re-roll that with a CP and get a better dice. Like, even a 2 or a 4 is, like, of course, way better than a 1, right? And that's going to be enough to get them in this position. So yeah, that's kind of what I have on Swooping Hawks. I know it's probably not what a lot of you want to hear. You want to hear that Swooping Hawks can do a ton of damage and stuff like that. And they definitely can to the right targets, but they're really not good against armor. That's the thing, right? What Warp Spiders do better than Swooping Hawks is they take out armored infantry better because they ignore cover base. They have torrent weapons. They don't really have to roll to hit. And also, they have AP, right? Warp Spiders have AP 1. Swooping Hawks don't. So everything is going to get their base save against them and sometimes better because of cover. Which means Swooping Hawks don't do well against anything really with a 4+ save or better. They struggle against. But against things that already are going to get a 4+ save, like demons where they have an invul save, or, units that don't have a high save at all, they're saving on a 5+, they're cultists or something like that, you're going to do some serious damage to them, and you're going to throw a huge wrench in your opponent's plans without the risk of taking mortal wounds. All right, guys, that is going to be it for our tabletop simulator example. I hope I showed you guys some of the insane movement that Swooping Hawks can pull off. I mean, that's just in Aeldari, for example, right? In Warhost, they can do something kind of similar to this. So if you guys are wondering, it's not the same exactly. It's not as good as this. But in Warhost, right, you can move forward your... Let's put measure movement on these guys real quick. Let me just show you what they can do in Warhost, and then we'll go back to the video presentation. Let's say they want to kind of move forward here in Warhost. They can move 17 inches in Warhost. So if they're right here on the line, let's just say they're on the line. They move 17 inches up. Put some right here. Boom. And then they can fire and fade right here, which is, they'll probably get an average of 3, maybe 4 inches. So that puts them right here. So that's still pretty good. It's not nearly as good as these, the lethal intent ones, but I mean, Aeldari is kind of like top dog for a reason. But in Warhost, that's still pretty decent, right? They can shoot at something, then go to the midboard, shoot at something, throw a grenade pack, and then, of course, move again and block something off. Alrighty, guys. We're going to end it there, but we'll be back to the video in just a second. Alright, so we're back, and in conclusion, Swooping Hawks don't really seem great on paper. I'm going to be honest. I was in the camp that they were kind of one of the worst aspect warriors. And in a lot of ways, they seem like a straight downgrade when compared to warp spiders. However, they do have some distinct advantages over warp spiders when used in certain ways. If you're running Aeldari, they're absolutely bonkers, especially when used correctly. They're a really good screening tool, and they're a really big threat to enemy units in the backfield. They're also a decent counter screening unit in other detachments, which, honestly, in my opinion, I think that they are a good mid-game screening unit. And we're going to start seeing a lot more of them. So, warp spiders, a lot of people are running ×3, ×2. When that usually happens, GW nerfs a little bit. Now, I don't think warp spiders deserve a nerf, but GW logic is probably just going to go there. So, after that nerf, especially after that nerf, I think we're going to see Hawks pop up a lot more in competitive play. They're a good screening unit. They can drop in, do some mortals, do some chip damage while they're at it, and warp spiders typically just don't do that, right? A squad of warp spiders that's screening and not shooting something is doing 0 damage, right? If we need to use a squad of warp spiders to block an opponent from getting through a wall, for example, they're not really doing damage unless there's something nearby because they have really short range. Swooping Hawks, on the other hand, can do a very similar thing. They can still screen, but they can also do some mortal wound damage to a close target. You only need 1 Swooping Hawk to see, of course. And in addition, they can shoot at something within 24 inches because they do have a better range. On top of that, they're cheaper than warp spiders by 10 points. It may not seem like a lot, but in the trading game, that could be a big deal. So yeah, Swooping Hawks, they're not as bad as people think they are. I think you just have to use them as what they are, which is they're not going to be a unit that's going to do a ton of damage. They're going to do a tiny bit of damage. They're going to provide you some utility. They're going to screen for you, and they're going to die. And that's kind of how you need to see them. And that's kind of where I think a lot of the fast-moving units in the Aeldari Codex are right now. We do have heavy hitters that can definitely hit hard and just blast opponents off the table. Swooping Hawks are not one of those units. All right? They are a utility unit. They are a harassment unit. And that's what they're good at. And actually, if you use them correctly, they can be brilliant at it. Just like I kind of went over in the tabletop simulator example. When positioned right, when used with the correct, kind of movement and planning and timing, they can be pretty good. All right, guys, that's going to be the end of today's video. Thanks for watching. We got more videos to come later this week. I'm going to try to up my production of strategy videos. Let me know what you guys want to see next. I'm going to do I'm going to, kind of finish off the units in the Codex. I'm going to talk about all of them eventually. But we're almost done with Aspect Warriors. We're I think we just have Howling Banshees and the Crimson Hunter left, and that's about it. And I will talk about the Crimson Hunter, guys, because again, I think it's one of those, a lot of people don't like it, but I think it's actually pretty good. Especially into Demon Princes, if you catch my drift, but we'll talk about that later. Alrighty, thank you so much to all my patrons and supporters who have helped support the channel over the last 2.5 years. Your help has greatly been appreciated, and it has improved the channel so much. So seriously, thank you guys. If you want to join the Patreon and become a supporter, I have free trials activated, and if you do want to support the channel monetarily, I'd be absolutely honored. Of course, that comes with a free invitation to our channel Discord with a lot of awesome Aeldari players, including some very competitive ones that are winning tournaments, going 4-1 in tournaments, doing very well, and, willing and happy to give advice to younger Eldar players and enthusiasts. So yeah, join us. We're an awesome bunch, and if you want some advice from me, I'm always happy to give it. Also, I have a channel store page and an Amazon affiliate link if you want to go ahead and check those things out for some discounted Eldar minis on Amazon or some discounted Eldar inspired apparel on the channel store page. I will leave those links in the description as well. All right, guys, that's it for today's video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. Peace out.